Foxtrot was like any other county, or so Mary Lynn had been told when she had moved to the small insular town of Black Hollow. Coming from the bustling city of Dallas, Texas, she wasn't sure what to expect. But she had a job to do. She was there to settle her grandmother's affairs after receiving a surprising letter naming her executive of the state. Mary Lynn had really never known her grandmother Louise. In fact, she had barely spoken to anyone from her father's side of the family after she was disowned as a teenager for being a lesbian. Why her grandmother, whom she had no real relationship with, would name her an executor was a mystery. And yet, here she was, packing her bags for Black Hollow, an obligation she couldn't quite ignore. Before leaving, she remembered the conversation with her girlfriend Patricia, who had voiced her frustrations from the shower. "I just don't get why you have to go back," Patricia exclaimed, her voice muffled by the sound of running water. "Because I'm the executor of the state," Mary Lynn answered as she folded clothes into a suitcase. Patricia sighed. "I know, but your dad and his side of the family are homophobic jerks. Remember the last time you saw him? He laughed when you said you were vegan." That memory hit hard, taking her back to her sister Kenzie's high school graduation in Whispering Pines. Mary Lynn hadn't wanted to go, but Kenzie had specifically asked her to be there. At the time, she didn't know why, but then it all became clear during Kenzie's graduation speech. Kenzie, assigned male at birth, and known as Kyle before transitioning, had stood proudly in front of the crowd. Mary Lynn could still hear her sister's voice in her mind. And despite Whispering Pines being full of backwoods, sibling, love-making idiots, they don't squash my spirit. Though I was assigned male at birth and given the name Kyle, that is not who I am. When I go to Darkwood University next year, I'll be living as myself. I'm a trans woman and my name is Kinsey. The auditorium had gone silent, dead silent. Tension so thick it was palpable. Mary Lynn had remembered the look on her father's face, anger mixed with disbelief. He hadn't said much then, but later at the graduation dinner, his ignorance was on full display. Mary Lynn and Patricia had been scanning the food table for any vegan options when her father, sitting with Kenzie, started laughing. "What's so funny?" Kenzie had asked, confused. "Oh, you know," their dad said between chuckles. "This is what happens when liberal commies ruin the country. Everyone wants to identify as another gender, as animal like foxes, and not eat meat like God intended." Patricia had stormed off, livid. "What's her problem?" the father had asked, utterly oblivious. Kenzie offered to check on Patricia, but Mary Lynn stopped her. "No, I'll talk to her. She's my fiancée, and one day she will be my wife." Her father's derisive snort still echoed in her head. "We hear this every time," Mary Lynn had snapped. "We see the crap you post on Facebook. It's just old at this point." "Well, when I was growing up," her father had said, "we got our asses beaten, respected people." Mary Lynn just rolled her eyes. "Yeah, Dad, and you voted for an orange spray-tan jerk who shows no one any respect." Looking back now, Mary Lynn wasn't exactly thrilled about going back to Black Hollow. After all, if her father's side of the family was anything like him, this was going to be a nightmare. But she told herself that maybe the people of Black Hollow weren't as bigoted and backwards as those in Whispering Pines. Maybe this time would be different. Patricia sighed, and Mary Lynn understood why she didn't want her to go. But deep down, Mary Lynn felt a pull, like she owed it to her grandmother Louise. They had barely known each other, having only met maybe 4 times in her entire life. Maybe this trip would be a chance to learn more about this woman, even though she had passed. "Are you taking the Forester or the Prius?" Patricia asked, now standing in the doorway with the towel wrapped around her. Mary Lynn closed her suitcase and smirked. "Didn't you say the thing next door were going to work on the Prius this weekend when you were off work?" Patricia laughed, walking over and sat on the bed. "Her name is Letty. Why do you always call her that thing?" "Because she's totally crushing on you," Mary Lynn teased. Patricia ran her fingers through Mary Lynn's bright red hair. "I only have eyes for you, so don't worry." Mary Lynn sighed, feeling a small wave of relief. She knew she wouldn't let silly insecurities get to her, but sometimes they did. Patricia got up and walked out of the room, and from the other room, Mary Lynn heard her shout, "After all, the only person I'd ever leave you for is Isla Fisher. She was hot in Wedding Crashers." Rolling her eyes with a smile, Mary Lynn hoisted the suitcase and headed for the door. Patricia, still wrapped in her towel, kissed her goodbye, and at the threshold, Be careful, she said in a tone softer now. As Marilyn loaded her suitcase into the back of the Subaru Forester, she heard Patricia call out, "And call me when you get to Black Hollow." Yeah, Marilyn called back, playfully dismissive. "Marilyn Johnson, I mean it," Patricia shouted out after her, a grin on her face. Laughing, Marilyn got into the car, feeling the warmth of Patricia's care, even as she prepared for the unknown ahead. Before heading out of Dallas, Marilyn had made one last stop at her favorite convenience store, Al Salam Mart, run by her friends Amir and Leela. The small family-owned shop was nestled on the corner of a busy street, its green and white sign standing out amidst the more generic chain stores around it. The couple had become good friends with her and Patricia over the years, and Al Salam had become their go-to spot for groceries, not just because Amir and Leela were thoughtful about what they stocked, but because of the friendship they had built. The little bell above the door jingled as Marilyn stepped inside. Amir, standing behind the counter, grinned proudly when he saw her. "Ah, Marilyn, it's been too long. What brings you here so early?" "Patricia kick you out of the house?" he teased, his voice carrying that warm familiarity. Marilyn chuckled. "Not quite. I'm actually heading out of town for a bit. Family stuff." Leela, busy stocking the shelves, turned around, curiosity lighting up her face. "Family stuff? Everything all right?" Marilyn gave a small shrug. "My grandmother passed, and apparently I'm the executive of her estate, and I'm headed to this little town called Black Hollow to sort things out." Leela frowned slightly. "Black Hollow? Sounds like one of those places where there's more cows than people." "Pretty much," Marilyn replied as she wandered toward the shelf where Leela was always kept the vegan snacks. She grabbed a few of their favorites, which Leah had been sure to stock specifically for her and Patricia. "But I'll be back soon. Don't sell out of these while I'm gone, okay? I need my vegan energy bars." Amir laughed heartedly. "Don't worry, we've got plenty. You two are the reason we keep them in stock in the first place." Marilyn smiled, feeling a sense of warmth and familiarity that would be leaving behind for a while. She had always appreciated how thoughtful they were, especially when so many others didn't get her or Patricia's lifestyle. As she headed toward the door, Leela called out, "Safe travels, Marilyn. And don't let any small town folks scare you away. You're always welcome here." Amir, more serious now, gave her a gentle smile. "We pray that Allah protects you on your travels. May He keep you safe and guide you wherever you go." Marilyn paused, touched by the sincerity in his words. "Thank you, Amir. That means a lot." With a final wave and a warm feeling in her chest, she stepped outside, the little bell jingling behind her. As she walked to a car, she thought about how much she'd missed the warmth of Al Salam Mart and her friends that she was leaving behind. She would miss them because they were both truly great people. A few times Amir and Leela had even invited Marilyn and Patricia to join them at the mosque for community events or festivals. Though Marilyn and Patricia were both occultists and Celtic Reconstructionists, they had never been afraid to attend other people's religious gatherings. For them, it wasn't about what religion you followed, but how open-minded you were and whether you respected others' beliefs. Amir and Leela always did. It was one of the things Marilyn loved about them the most, how they could bridge their cultural and spiritual differences with mutual respect. Marilyn smiled to herself as she climbed back into the Forester. After waving goodbye through the window, she set off, watching the familiar city streets give way to long stretches of open road. She wasn't sure how long she'd been driving or how much time had passed when she saw the withered wooden sign, "Now entering Foxtrot County." Her stomach tightened with anticipation. Soon she would be making her way into Black Hollow, a place she had never been, but one that she had already felt heavy with the unknown. Marilyn continued listening to the radio, though it had become more of a background hum. The DJ, a guy named Jason something, rambled on about his days as a college DJ, but she found herself tuning out. It wasn't long before the static crept in, and she switched to another station, hoping for something more engaging. As she drove, her mind wandered to the thoughts of Black Hollow and what awaited her there. After a while, she finally spotted a sign. "You're now entering Black Hollow. Population 1,000. Marilyn nodded, feeling a sense of familiarity wash over her. It sounded like about the same size as her hometown of Whispering Pines, which she had always felt like it was small enough to know everyone, but big enough to keep secrets hidden away. As she drove in town, Marilyn noticed a weather sign announcing the upcoming Hunt and Harvest Festival. She rolled her eyes into sight, escaping her lips. Great. It's one of those places. she muttered to herself, already anticipating the town's traditional festivities and the hunting culture that came with them. Marilyn wasn't the type to broadcast her veganism to others. She understood how off-putting it could be to some people. The stereotype of vegans as activists, splashing blood on fur coats and brandishing signs declaring meat as murder, often overshadowed the more nuanced reasons behind their choices. While she despised the fur industry and personally believed that killing animals was wrong, she also recognized that everyone was entitled to their own beliefs. She never judged others for their choices. Instead, she preferred to lead by example, hoping her lifestyle might inspire curiosity rather than defensiveness. She pulled to the side of the road and dialed the lawyer's office. Miss Collins, the secretary, answered with her cheerful southern accent. "Huntley Clark and Collins, how may I direct your call?" "Hey, Miss Collins, it's me, Mary Lynn," she replied with a small smile creeping onto her face. If Miss Collins was this friendly, maybe the entire town of Black Hollow wouldn't be so bad after all. "Oh, hi, sweetheart. How can I help you?" Miss Collins said warmly. "Is Mr. Collins in?" Mary Lynn asked. "Oh, Henry, he's getting out ready for the festival, but perhaps I could help you with something." Mary Lynn sighed despite ignoring the looming hunt and harvest festival. The idea of it unsettled her. People would be hunting, and while she understood that many enjoyed the taste of meat, it wasn't something she couldn't change. "Gods, I'm gonna frickin' starve here," she muttered under her breath. She considered looking for a nearby town where she could find something meat-free, but on her way she hadn't spotted any town for miles. It felt as if Black Hollow was enveloped by nothing but endless forest. The word alone sent a shiver down her spine, though she couldn't explain why. Perhaps while she was here, she could take a trip into the forest. She'd always been fond of nature, which aligned perfectly with her witchy faith. Mary Lynn sighed, trying to ignore her discomfort about the upcoming Hunt and Harvest Festival. "I was going to ask how to get to my grandmother's place. I've never been to Black Hollow." "Of course, it's easy, darling. Just take a right at the old oak tree while you're in town. You can't miss it. It's a big, beautiful tree that everyone knows," Miss Collins explained enthusiastically. "Got it, right at the old oak tree, then what?" Mary Lynn asked, jotting down her notes on her phone app that she could take notes on. "After that, head down to Maple Street for about 2 miles. Keep an eye out for the community center. It's a big brick building," Miss Collins continued. "Okay, Maple Street for 2 miles," and then Mary Lynn's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly as she focused. "Once you pass the community center, you'll see a small sign that says Sunny Acres Lane. Turn left there. Your grandmother's house is the second on the right. It's a quaint little cottage with blue shutters. You won't miss it," Miss Collins reassured her. "Thank you, Miss Collins. This really helps," Mary Lynn replied with a mix of gratitude and nervousness. "Oh, honey, no problem at all. And don't worry. If you get lost, just ask everyone in town. We're all friendly around here," Miss Collins added with a chuckle. "And I'll keep an eye out for you at the festival. You'll come, won't you?" Mary Lynn hesitated, the thought of mingling with the locals at a hunting festival making her stomach twist. "I'm not sure about that, but thanks for the directions." "Just drive safe, Mary Lynn, and may God protect you on your travels," Miss Collins said warmly. "Thanks, Miss Collins. I appreciate it," Mary Lynn said before hanging up, her mind swirling with the thought of her grandmother and the unknown town ahead. As she drove off, the road seemed both inviting and intimidating, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the trip was going to be more significant than she ever imagined. As Mary Lynn pulled away from the convenience store, she felt the quaint charm of Black Hollow enveloping her. The streets were lined with old, tall oak trees, their leaves a mix of vibrant oranges and deep reds, hinting the arrival of autumn. Sunlight streamed through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the road. Driving along Maple Street, she passed small, well-kept homes with white picket fences and flower gardens bursting with colors. Children played in yards, their laughter echoing against the backdrop of the setting sun. She noticed a few neighbors chatting over fences, their friendly smiles inviting yet slightly overwhelming. As she approached the community center, she could see a flurry of activity. Banners were being hung, and the scent of freshly baked goods wafted through the air. People were setting up booths with signs promoting local vendors, and a band was rehearsing lively folk tunes nearby. The anticipation for the Hunt and Harvest Festival was palpable, and Mary Lynn felt a mix of curiosity and trepidation. "Gods, it's really happening," she muttered under her breath, rolling her eyes slightly at the festive atmosphere. Turning left onto Sunny Acres Lane, she had noticed the street had a slightly different vibe. The houses were a bit more spread out, surrounded by patches of wildflowers and tall grass. Some homes had porches adorned with pumpkins and hay bales, contributing to the harvest spirit. She could hear the faint sounds of laughter and conversation drifting for several yards as families prepared for the festival. As she drove further down the lane, her heart began to race. She caught sight of her grandmother's house nestled on the end of the street. The cottage stood out with its charming blue shutters and white trim. It had a weathered wooden door, and the roof was decorated with moss, giving it a rustic yet cozy feel. An old swing hung from the sturdy oak tree in the front yard, swaying gently in the breeze. Pulling into the gravel driveway, Mary Lynn felt an unexpected wave of nostalgia wash over her. She hadn't known her grandmother well, but the house seemed to whisper stories from the past. The warm glow of the porch light illuminated the area, making the cottage appear even more inviting. As she parked the Subaru Forester, her mind raced with thoughts. Would she find the remnants of her grandmother's life here? Would there be something that connected her to this woman she barely knew? The door creaked open as she stepped out of the car, the crisp autumn air wrapping around her like a blanket. Mary Lynn stood for a moment, gazing at the house, a mix of excitement and apprehension bubbling within her. The beauty of the cottage and the memories it held felt almost tangible. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being a stranger in this place. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and approached the door, ready to uncover whatever secrets her grandmother's home might hold. Mary Lynn stood before the door of her deceased grandmother's house, ready to step inside, when a voice called out, "Well, howdy!" She turned to her right and saw an elderly man leaning against a nearby fence. He appeared to be around her grandmother's age, if she was still alive. "Hi," Mary Lynn replied, offering a smile. The man grinned back at her. "You must be Louise's granddaughter, am I right?" Mary Lynn nodded. "I'm Earl," he introduced himself. "Your grandmother, well, she was a fine lady in my book. So you here for the house, the festival, or both?" Mary Lynn hesitated, unsure how to respond. The idea of hunting and eating meat made her uncomfortable, but she knew she had to blend in during her stay. "To be honest, I'm not much for festivals. I'm actually here to figure out what to do with my grandmother's belongings." Earl nodded, understanding. "Your grandmother didn't care much for the festival either. She was what you call the ones who don't eat meat, but aren't quite vegans." "Vegetarian?" Mary Lynn offered. "Yeah, that's it," Earl confirmed with a nod. Mary Lynn smiled at the connection they shared, even though she was a vegan rather than a vegetarian. It was comforting to know that her grandmother held similar values. Earl sighed, continuing, "It's tough to decide what to do with all that stuff. That's someone's entire life in there." Mary Lynn agreed. "Yeah, I'm not sure what I expect to do with it all." Before walking away, Earl advised her, "Just follow your heart. You'll be okay. Your grandmother always did." Then Earl was gone. Mary Lynn stepped into her grandmother's house and immediately noticed that someone had already begun packing her belongings. A mixture of sadness and nostalgia washed over her as she took in the cluttered living room. After a moment of hesitation, she turned back to her Subaru Forester to retrieve her suitcase, dragging it along inside with a sigh. She spotted an old couch and placed her suitcase down, not noticing the remote control nestled between the cushions. As she sat her suitcase down, it accidentally pressed a button, causing the television to spring to life. The flickering screen revealed the local news, and Mary Lynn felt an involuntary urge to watch, despite her reluctance. The male anchor, Tom Reynolds, appeared on screen, followed by the female anchor, Sarah Mitchell. She quickly turned her gaze away, scanning the room instead. Boxes littered the space, filled with memories of her grandmother's life. But her attention was soon pulled back to the television when Tom's serious tone caught her ear. "Disturbing news comes from Cedar Ridge Road. We go to Debbie Smalls for the details." Mary Lynn's heart quickened as the screen switched to the news correspondent Debbie Smalls, with a concerned expression, reported, "Lance Thompson has gone missing. All that was found on the back porch appears to be blood." "Blood?" Mary Lynn's stomach tightened at the thought. This was a small town. What could possibly be lurking in a place like Black Hollow? Her mind raced with questions, the cozy memories of grandmother's home overshadowed by a growing sense of unease. This time, Tom spoke. "Debbie, does Sheriff Doug Hale think the recent events might be connected to what happened with Bubba J and Arnold?" Debbie replied. "He hasn't commented on the issue yet." Just then a loud knock at the door startled Mary Lynn, making her heart leap into her throat. She quickly walked over to answer and found Henry Collins, the lawyer, standing on the porch. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. Henry glanced at the TV, his expression somber. "Horrible news, isn't it?" Mary Lynn nodded, her brow furrowed. "Yeah, I was just trying to figure out what happened with Bubba J and Arnold." Henry sighed, hesitating to respond. "It's okay, Mr. Collins," Mary Lynn reassured him. "I come from Dallas. We see horrible violence all the time." "That may be true, Miss Johnson," Henry replied. "But here in Black Hollow, we just don't see that kind of thing, except on those Dick Wolf shows." "Law and Order?" Mary Lynn asked. Henry nodded. "Yeah, my wife Jennifer and I watch it every night. There are a lot of episodes, though, she just can't stomach." Mary shifted her suitcase to uncover the remote and turned off the television. She then faced Henry and continued. "Well, Bubba and Arnold were out hunting, and their wives hadn't heard from them. Sheriff Hale went out looking for them after they had been missing for 5 days. He found their campsite." Henry paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Something it's hard to explain. Their tents were torn apart in a way I've never seen before. Their belongings were rummaged through. Food was eaten, and there was blood. So much blood." Mary Lynn's stomach churned as Henry detailed how the blood trail led all the way to the lake. The most disturbing part was when he mentioned the medical examiner was certain some of the blood contained human entrails. But after that, the trail just ended. Nothing. No sign of Bubba or Arnold. Henry added, "The M.E. and Sheriff Hale said it looked like one of the two men had been trying to spell something but didn't finish." "What do you mean?" Mary Lynn asked. Her curiosity piqued despite her unease. Henry looked pale as if the thought made him queasy. "All that was spelled in blood on one of the trees was just 2 letters, an F and an O. No one knows what they were trying to spell." Mary Lynn nodded, feeling a shiver run down her spine. She had heard her share of gruesome stories back in Dallas, but this was something altogether different. Too much for her to handle. Henry cleared his throat, breaking the uneasy silence. "I almost forgot the reason I came by," he said, as if he suddenly remembered something important. Mary Lynn raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" With a small, unapologetic smile, Henry reached in his coat pocket and pulled out a set of keys, holding them out to her. "These are for your grandmother's safety deposit box. She left instructions for you to take care of it." Mary Lynn took the keys, feeling their weight in her palm. "I didn't know she had one," she muttered, glancing down at the keys. She felt a sudden pang of curiosity, wondering what her grandmother had deemed important enough to lock away. Henry nodded. "Not many did. She was always a private woman." Henry tipped his hat, offering a polite nod before heading out the door. Left alone, Mary Lynn glanced down at the small set of keys he had handed her. Attached was a slip of paper with the address of the bank where her grandmother's safety deposit box was kept. As she turned the keys over in her hand, a sudden thought struck her. She had forgotten to call Patricia. "Of course," she muttered, feeling the weight of yet another task. She quickly pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found Patricia's number. After a few rings, the line picked up. "Hey, Patricia. It's me, Mary Lynn." Patricia's voice was warm on the other end. "Oh, hey, baby. How's it going?" Mary Lynn sighed, her tone neutral. "It's okay. I met one of my grandma's neighbors. He was nice. The lawyer seems all right, too." "But?" Mary Lynn hesitated. "They've got this thing called the Hunt and Harvest Festival. The whole town seems obsessed with it." Patricia's response came with a knowing tone. "Ah, I see. It's not like I'm judging them, you know. It's just weird for me." "No, I get it," Patricia said, her voice full of understanding. "It's not exactly your thing." Mary Lynn sighed. "Exactly. For a small town, Black Hollow isn't exactly all peaceful like Maryberry." Patricia sounded intrigued. "Oh, really? What do you mean?" "Yeah," Mary Lynn replied, her voice lowering. 2 hunters went missing recently, and how someone else has disappeared from their home now." Patricia's curiosity deepened. "Do they have any suspects?" Mary Lynn shook her head. "No, nothing. Henry, the lawyer, said stuff like this doesn't happen in Black Hollow." There was a brief silence before Patricia spoke again, a hint of humor in her voice. "Yeah, but the place is called Black Hollow. That already sounds spooky." Mary Lynn had to agree. That name did seem a bit eerie now that she thought about it. It reminded her of the town's isolation, and she added, "You're right. This town feels cut off. I didn't see any towns nearby when I was driving in. It's almost Overlook Hotel isolated." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yeah," Mary Lynn continued. "It's surrounded by endless woods, just as far as the eye can see. And I know I'm all into nature, but there's something off about those trees. Patricia, puzzled, asked, "Off how? They seem lifeless. Empty. I haven't heard a single bird since I got here," Mary Lynn explained. Patricia didn't seem convinced. "Why is that weird?" "It's the middle of spring," Mary Lynn said, her voice more serious now. "You'd think there'd be something, but nothing." Mary Lynn and Patricia had talked for what felt like hours. She couldn't remember when she finally had dozed off, but she was jolted awake by frantic pounding on the front door. The sharp sound of screaming followed, sending a chill down her spine. Disoriented, she sat on the couch, realizing she must have fallen asleep mid-conversation. Her cell phone laying face down on the floor, the screen dark, dead battery. Patricia had probably hung up when she had noticed Mary Lynn dozing off. Still groggy, Mary Lynn walked toward the door cautiously, her heart racing. The events of the past few hours weighed heavily on her mind, and the disappearances made her uneasy. She wasn't about to open the door for anyone, especially not in the dead of night in a town she barely knew. Standing by the door, she hesitated for a moment before calling out, "Who's there?" The words left her mouth before she could even think twice. As soon as the question escaped, she muttered to herself, "Good job, Mary. That's how the killer gets you. Always gets you. You never ask who's there. That's when they smash through the window and..." She stopped herself, feeling a mix of nervousness and self-reproach. She pressed her ear against the door, listening carefully for any response. The voice on the other side of the door sounded familiar, and Mary Lynn's heart raced as she recognized it. "It's Jennifer, dear. Henry's missing." Mary Lynn hesitated, but slowly cracked the door open, peering through the narrow gap. Jennifer Collins, frantic and wide-eyed, stood on the doorstep. Her clothes were stained with dark patches of blood. "Oh my God, Miss Collins," Mary Lynn gasped, opening the door a little wider. "Did you stumble upon a murder scene?" Jennifer was trembling, her breath shallow and erratic. Without thinking, Mary Lynn quickly ushered her inside, guiding her toward the dining area. "Oh shit, where are my manners?" she muttered, realizing she hadn't even asked if Jennifer was okay. They sat down at the table, and Mary Lynn, trying to keep her voice calm, gently pressed, "Start from the beginning. What happened?" Jennifer's hands were shaking, but she took a deep breath, preparing to speak. Jennifer began, her voice shaky. "I had just put the kids down for bed. They're with their Nana, Wilma, now," Mary Lynn gently interjected. "What about the sheriff? Sheriff Hale, right?" Jennifer, still trembling, continued. "They found his car near Willow Creek Road, but no sign of Doug. He radioed in after hearing something out there, asked for backup. All they found was blood inside his car." She pressed and paused, her voice wavering. "I called Wilma as soon as I heard. She said she'd wait for Deputy Parnell, but let's just say he's not exactly capable. I don't think he can handle a real threat." Despite Jennifer not giving Mary Lynn the full picture, what she did share painted a grim reality. Something was terribly wrong in Black Hollow. People were vanishing, and whatever's out there seemed to be getting worse. But what exactly was it? And where were these missing people going? Jennifer continued, her voice trembling. "Henry, well, in his old age, he uses the bathroom a lot. We've got a window in there, but it's too small for anyone to fit through." Mary Lynn nodded, letting her know she was listening as Jennifer pressed on. "He was in the bathroom when I heard the glass shatter. Then I heard Henry scream. I went to the door, but that damn thing..." Jennifer suddenly slammed her hands on the table, frustration boiling over. She quickly apologized. "I'm sorry, Mary. I'm just so shaken up. I shouldn't have done that. I know this table's important to you. It was your grandmother's, right? Got it from Old Man Withers, the woodsmith, before he passed." Mary Lynn reassured her. "It's okay, Jennifer." Jennifer continued, struggling to keep her composure. "I told Henry 100 times to fix that doorknob. It jams. When I finally got it open, he was gone. There were drops of blood on the floor and near the window." Her eyes were wide with fear, and Mary Lynn felt a chill run down her spine. "Someone got him?" Mary Lynn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer shook her head slowly, her voice filled with dread. "No, dear, I don't think it's someone. I think it's something." A wave of unease washed over Mary Lynn, and she said, "Maybe, what you call it? The Hunt and Harvest Festival, right? Perhaps it should be canceled," Jennifer responded. "Oh dear, I don't know about that. It's what attracts the tourists." Marilyn tried to rein in her frustration as she replied, I understand that, but as a vegan, I'm not really into hunting. People are disappearing. Jennifer nodded gravely. I know. Your grandmother despised the whole festival, too. She believed it was going too far for Black Hollow. Apparently, the fox breed around here is endangered. The fact that the fox breed targeted during this hunt and harvest festival in Black Hollow was in danger sent a surge of anger through Maryland. It was one thing to hunt animals, something she'd always opposed as a vegan, but this was an endangered species. The thought that Black Hollow didn't even care was infuriating. Endangered? Marilyn asked, her voice rising. Yes, the foxes thrive, but the town has hunted them nearly to extinction. The governor has received complaints from animal and climate activists for years, yet the money the festival brings to Foxtrot County, Black Hollow, and the state seems to outweigh those concerns. Marilyn struggled to contain her anger. This was absurd. The potential damage to the local ecosystem and the fact that this species was being driven to the brink of extinction was infuriating. And all for what? To line the pockets of the state, the county, and the town? What was wrong with these people? Jennifer continued. Your grandmother and I have been voicing our concerns for 6 years, but it's all fallen on deaf ears. Wait, really? Marilyn asked, taken aback. Jennifer nodded. Oh, yes, dear. I've lived in Black Hollow my entire life. I just don't see the point of the fox hunt. It's awful. But Henry, on the other hand, well, you know how men can be. Marilyn shook her head, a hint of smile playing on her lips. Actually, I don't. I'm a lesbian. Jennifer smiled playfully. Ah, fellow member of the Alphabet Mafia, she teased, jabbing Marilyn gently in the ribs. Marilyn raised an eyebrow, amused. Really? Oh, yes, dear. I may be married to a man, but I have an appreciation for women as well. Marilyn nodded. So you're bisexual? Not quite, Jennifer clarified. I'm pansexual, but I suppose it's the same kind of thing. Marilyn smiled as she listened to Jennifer, who chuckled, looking a bit calmer now. I always assumed your grandmother wasn't straight, but she could have just been a really great ally. Intrigued, Marilyn asked. How so? Jennifer replied. We always referred to Louise as the town activist. There was never a progressive cause she didn't support. It always drove Graham mad. Graham? Marilyn asked, confused, creasing her brow. Jennifer nodded. Yes, Black Hollow's mayor. Graham Foster. He had a crush on Louise, but he always was frustrated by activism. Unfortunately for us, he's always the biggest supporter of the Hunt and Harvest Festival. As it all started to click into place for Marilyn, Jennifer continued, Yeah, he's the one I was talking about when I mentioned how difficult it would be to get the festival canceled, even with the people disappearing. Marilyn offered Jennifer a place to stay for the night, suggesting that she could sleep on the bed while they figured everything out in the morning. Tomorrow is the Hunt and Harvest Festival, Jennifer reminded her. I know. When morning comes, I'm going to try to talk to Mayor Foster, Marilyn replied with termination. Jennifer nodded and headed off to the bathroom. Marilyn settled onto the couch, falling asleep quickly. When she woke up, she realized she had left before Jennifer returned. Determined to find answers, she made her way to the town hall to speak with the mayor. The secretary shook her head, refusing. He's very busy, she said curtly. I don't give a damn, frankly. There are people disappearing. You should cancel this whole thing, Marilyn demanded, her frustration boiling over. Again, the secretary refused to let Marilyn pass. Ignoring her, Marilyn stormed into the mayor's office. Mayor Foster looked up from behind his desk, a phone call just ending. Parnell, I'll have to call you back, he said before hanging up. The secretary stepped in flustered. I'm sorry, Mayor. I told you were busy. Nonsense, Mayor Foster replied with a wave of his hand. For Louise's granddaughter, I have all the time in the world. The secretary walked out, closing the door behind her. Mayor Foster looked at Marilyn and asked, So what can I do for you? It's Marilyn, right? Marilyn nodded. I thought so, he said, leaning back in his chair. Your grandmother talked about you all the time. She was upset that she never got to know you. Marilyn was taken back. Really? Yeah, the mayor replied. Your father refused to speak to her after your grandfather died, from what I understand. Marilyn had never known much about her grandfather or grandmother. Her grandfather had passed away 3 years before she was born. My father always made it seem like my grandmother was just like him, she admitted. Nonsense, Mayor Foster said, shaking his head. Your grandmother had been a Democrat since at least the days of Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey, I believe. This was something Marilyn had never known. She had realized she didn't know much about her grandparents at all. Her father had always claimed they wanted nothing to do with her, making it seem like they were just like him. But here was Mayor Foster saying that she and her grandmother had a lot in common. Marilyn sighed, remembering the purpose of her visit. I hate to ruin the festivities, but Mayor Foster, as Louise's granddaughter, I implore you to cancel the festival. People are disappearing. The mayor stood up and walked over to her. Dear, I know your grandmother didn't support the festival. She and Jennifer always pushing for it to stop, but the money it brings into this town. Marilyn took a deep breath, reminding herself that he was the mayor and she needed to keep her cool. Despite his outdated views, he seemed like a decent man. Mayor Foster, people are disappearing. What if it's a person behind it? Dear, he replied, shaking his head, we live in the South. Plenty of people at the festival will be armed. Why was he so stubborn? His town was in danger, and he seemed oblivious to the threat. Before Marilyn could plead with him again, a loud crash echoed from outside the town. They both rushed out, only to find the secretary's body sprawled on the floor. A fox stood over her, blood dripping from his mouth. Oh, Father in heaven, what is wrong with it? Mayor Foster exclaimed, his face pale with shock. Mary Lynn felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at the creature. The fox turned and looked at Mayor Foster, and in its gaze she saw something unexpected. Was that hate? Could a fox really harbor such a feeling? She'd always believed that animals could feel the same emotion and pain that humans did. Before either of them could react, a fox lunged at Mayor Foster, sinking its teeth into his face. As he screamed, in an instant he was on the ground, blood spilling around him. Mary Lynn felt frozen in horror. There was nothing she could do. Panicking, she bolted out of the building, but what she saw made her heart race. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of the very foxes Black Hollow had once hunted had descended upon the town. Their eyes gleaming with a feral intensity, the bodies of the recently deceased were strewn across what Mary Lynn presumed was the festival site. A grotesque display of carnage. Out of the chaos, Earl and Jennifer emerged, surprisingly unscathed, as the foxes parted to let them pass. It's the foxes! Jennifer gasped, her eyes wide with horror. Oh, I saw several other people dead. Half of your grandmother's neighbors are gone, Earl added, his voice shaking. The chilling thought sent a wave of dread through Mary Lynn. She couldn't shake the question from her mind. Why hadn't the foxes attacked Earl and Jennifer? The foxes stood frozen for a moment. Then chaos erupted as they lunged at the remaining townsfolk. Screams filled the air, mingling with frantic cries of the crowd as the foxes descended upon their victims. Amidst the carnage, Earl, Jennifer, and Mary Lynn remained untouched, their hearts racing with confusion and fear. Why had the foxes spared them? With no time to ponder, the three of them took off, sprinting through the horrific scene of chaos, carnage, and despair. They pushed their way past the terrified masses, desperately heading back toward her grandmother's house. Hoping to find safety, Mary Lynn dashed inside, quickly grabbing her suitcase as she shouted for Jennifer and Earl to get into the Forester. Time was slipping away and she knew they had to leave this haunted town behind. The memories of her grandmother's estate felt unsettled and heavy as she glanced back, her heart aching for what they were leaving. Once she climbed to the car, the horror of the foxes tearing through the neighbors' yards loomed large in her mind. The chilling cries of the victims echoed in the ears, a stark reminder of the danger they were fleeing. As Mary Lynn revved the engine, Jennifer's grip tightened around Mary Lynn's suitcase, her pulse racing with fear and adrenaline. They had to escape this nightmare. As the foxes descended upon the remaining townsfolk, they inexplicably let the vehicle pass, showing no interest in pursuing them. Once they were finally out of town, Mary Lynn slammed the brakes and stepped out of the car, her breath hitching in her throat. She turned back to look at the town, horror flooding her senses. The scene was a grotesque nightmare. The foxes mercilessly tore into the bodies left behind, ripping out eyes, hair, and organ. Blood flowed freely into the streets, reminiscent of wine spilling during the French Revolution, painting the ground in a chilling crimson red. The town that had once hunted the foxes had now become hunted. For years, they'd relentlessly pursued an entire species to the brink of extinction, and now their revenge had been extracted. Cars filled with survivors, those fortunate enough to escape the fox's wrath, sped past Mary Lynn, their drivers' faces twisted in panic and fear. That scene would haunt Mary Lynn for years to come. Afterwards, she dropped Earl off with his family and did the same for Jennifer. Upon returning to Dallas, she confided in Patricia about everything that had transpired. For an entire year, awoke each night gripped by nightmares of the horrific day. Years later, while traveling with Patricia and their newborn baby to visit a friend, they passed through the ghostly remains of the town. Mary Lynn insisted they stop. What lay before her was a haunting sight. Black Hollow was abandoned. Everything from before the foxes had descended remained, untouched and eerily preserved. The blood of the fallen still stained the cracked asphalt, and nature had begun to reclaim its territory. Vines snaked through the debris, and the grass flourished in the cracks. The town stood silent, a chilling reminder of the screams of terror and panic from that fateful day, like a memorial. Though years had passed, the memory of nature's wrath lingered vividly in Mary Lynn's mind. As they climbed back into the car and drove away, Black Hollow became more than just a place. It transformed into a haunting memory, a warning for anyone who dared to pass through and anger Mother Nature.